Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening from wherever you are and tuning into this webinar. Thanks for attending, and we'll get started. As you can see, the topic of today's webinar, it's about the migration from SAP PO to Integration Suite. This webinar will be presented by Solis and Rojo. So in today's webinar, we will touch upon the migration, but also we will touch upon the opportunity to do integration modernization, since you're moving off a existing integration platform with its capabilities to a new integration platform, and that opens up for opportunities to modernize your integrations. So having said that, here's the agenda of today. So what we're going to do first, a quick introduction of the company and the presenters of today's webinar. And then we'll dive into the content where it's been presented by the different presenters in this webinar. So first, let's introduce the two companies. So it's Solis and Rojo that present today's webinar. Why are we presenting this? Because both companies, both Solis and Rojo, are closely aligned to SAP, and especially to SAP integration in the integration domain. Solis provides the advanced event mesh, which is Solis technology in SAP's cloud integration suite. And Rojo, we are a company that are providing the adapters natively built within the SAP cloud integration suite. And also we've done loads of PO to CI migrations for companies around the globe. And next to PO to CI migrations, there might also be some Neo to Cloud Foundry companies in here, so we've done a couple of those as well. So with both companies having lots of experience within the integration domain, but also we offer the opportunity to modernize your integrations. So part of this webinar today will be about how to migrate, and another part will be, if you migrate, think about where you're going to and what opportunity that would offer to you as a company. And we'll present this with the following people. We have Christian on from Solis. He will present the advanced event mesh and its functionalities in the first part. We have Ankit and John, colleagues from Rojo, that will present the PO to CI migration. And what we'll do first is we'll have John do an introduction on the integration modernization. So with this, I'll hand it over to John. And one last thing, by the way, before I forget. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, which you have available. There's two moderators on the chat. So we'll take your questions, and in the end we do a question and answer session. So if you have anything, a remark, a question, put it in the chat and we'll pick it up from there. With that, I'll hand it over to John to do the first part on the integration modernization. Over to you, John.
Okay, hope you can see my screen. Yes. Yeah. All right. Yep. You can see it. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. So the part I will try to explain to you a little bit is another angle of looking at these migrations. I know a lot of you are thinking about it, how to go from your SAP PI or SAP process orchestration to the integration suite. And we hear everyone using the word migration. We like to offer you an alternative way to think about it because we see it more as a modernization. Because, you know, you're going from SAP PO today where you have an unflexible pipeline. You pretty much have a sender and then mappings, and routing, and then receiver. Whereas in integration suite, you have a lot more capabilities. You have a flexible pipeline, and you know, there's a lot more you can do, a lot more features. So in those circumstances, just doing a lift and shift, obviously you can do that, but it will be a pity because this is a really unique opportunity to rethink how you do your integration, right? That's why we see it as a modernization approach. And also we hear from a lot of customers the challenge of the IT team to justify why you have to spend so much effort and money to perform this migration. But you're going from an on-premise to a cloud-based, an iPaaS basically, where you have different challenges because you have to reconsider your security, for instance, right? So it's not just a lift and shift. Well, there will be a change to it. So to be able to articulate to your business as well, what is it that you'll bring to the table now, right? So you can think about it from a broader perspective. It's really a modernization of your integration landscape. So typically what we do with customers is as well, we look at, okay, because you're going to move from an old house to a new house, why don't you set up the new house in a way you would want it to be, right? And therefore, we consider a governance. Yeah? So because, to set up that new house, we look at governance. We say, hey, put in place the house the way you will want it to be, and then start a migration afterward, right? Or, or your modernization. So in that governance, you have aspects like integration strategy. In a strategy, you have to look how do you deal with your cloud to cloud or cloud to on-premise to on-premise integration, right? What about integration patterns, right? You have to consider here, how am I going to deal with, I will not have a point-to-point integration, for instance, and I want to change it. What happens if I was using, something like HTTP before? Will it become HTTPS? Just to give an example here. What if I had one IDOC coming from one source system and going to multiple target system? Is it an opportunity for me now to use a pub/sub approach? There's a lot of things you can think about, right? What about your CI/CD setup, right? So there's a lot of things you can consider here to put out this governance in place. And it's better to think about governance before you start your migration, because that obviously will govern how you move those interfaces, especially with your patterns. And then typically we perform an assessment of your existing integration. And in that assessment, you will start by looking at things like, do I move all integration that I have at this moment? Or will I, remove some because maybe there's an integration which have not been used for a year? Does it make sense to migrate it? What about consolidation of 5 interfaces which will become one, right? We run the SAP migration tool typically, which gives you which one of them need to be migrated and which one are simple or not simple to migrate. And then we run our enrichment, what we call enrichment assessment on top of it, because this enrichment will be more based on your own integration pattern that you just define in that governance section, right? So it will say, okay, change this existing pattern to this. And this is what we try to semi-automate. And of course, it gives you suggestion of some modernization as well along the way to say, think about events here, for instance. Okay. Then after that, you have the setup, obviously, that you have to consider. So meaning, do I install edge integration cell here because I have so many on-premise systems, right? Landscape, let's say. Do I use a cloud connector here? So those type of questions you'll have to put. What about your DevOps? So that's one considers. And lastly, you perform this migration. And obviously here in this migration, with everything we've done before, including your governance and the assessment and the setup, we try to automate as much as we can, because that's key, right? Think about if you will have a couple of 1,000 interfaces with your new pattern design, you don't want to do it manually, obviously. You might want to rename your interfaces along the way anyway, right? You might want to break one interface into many pieces, right? And lastly, what we mentioned there, right? So in terms of your modernization recommendation, do you want to change all the FTP to SFTP, things like that? So the semi-automation. All right, let me go to another aspect to consider. So some of the recommendations are, for instance, keep the core clean, as you know, and that involves also a lot of other consideration, right? So it will be, for instance, imagine that you will have RFC. Do you replace your RFC or your BAPI to SOAP or OData, right? What about replacing some of your existing interfaces with standard content that exists, because you know SAP has provided some standard content for some scenarios. Should you not reuse them? Again, what about security aspect that we mentioned to you before? That will include some in a clean core part, but you will have other aspects as well, like integration style. So if you have something like you have a single source sending to multiple receiver, like I said, you break it to events. What about changing any polling to a push mechanism instead? And when you have IDOCs, for instance, you can go to events. Here's an example, for instance, of such suggestion, right? You will see that there is a lot of interfaces here in this list, and it will tell you for those interfaces, I suggest that you change the integration style, because we want you to use events instead. And this topic of events will be discussed in the next slides. So my colleagues who will take over will focus on that. It's just to give you an idea. Now, to summarize on this part, again, this is a huge opportunity because you'll be performing testing, you might involve the business, and all that. It's an opportunity for you to modernize the integration landscape. By all means, try as much as possible not to see it as a lift and shift. With this, I pass on the word to my colleague Christian, who will take you to the next slide.
Right. Thank you very much, John, and welcome everyone. So I'm here to talk a little bit about event-driven architecture and event-driven integration and why you should consider adopting this when you are doing your PO migrations, right? So I'm a strong believer in event-driven architecture. I've worked for this for many, many years. And the context of why event-driven architecture is becoming more and more important and event-driven integration with it is that we live in a world of more. So we see that most businesses have more and more applications. Roughly, there's over 1,000 per enterprise. The larger enterprises have more. It's growing and growing. The enterprises themselves, their IT infrastructure is more distributed. So 90% of those organizations are multi-cloud or hybrid cloud. Some of them do have edge use cases as well. So your IT systems that need to talk to each other sit across a diverse landscape and geolocations. They also are required to share more and more data with each other. So that is going up 25% every year. And at the same time, everyone is expecting that to be faster and more quickly, ideally in real time. So as soon as something happens in one system, the data is available in another system. So that's the backdrop of where we are today. And because of all of this, this is making integration more difficult, right? So if we look at the patterns of integration that are still quite prevalent, I'm not saying everyone is doing everything like this, but when I talk to customers, I see still a lot of use of these patterns. So that's why we are talking about them. And one of them is batch delivery. So when we talk about batch delivery, it's often that one system does distribute data at a certain time of the day, maybe overnight or every hour or something like that. Sometimes it's being written to a file that gets transported and then imported. Sometimes it can also be direct. But the key attribute is here that it's not happening as and when the data changes. It's happening in intervals. And we'll talk about the disadvantages of that. Point-to-point is another pattern that is still heavily used, specifically in PO use cases. You would often wire up system A to system B. Maybe you have a routing node in there and the same data goes to system C, but those systems are coupled directly with each other via that flow, right? So if one of those systems is down, the whole integration doesn't work. And it's also making it quite complex the more systems you connect with each other. Then we have a pattern of often periodic polling being used to get data from one system to another. So in this case, the target system is asking for the data, and because it doesn't know when the data changes, it has to ask at periodic times. So maybe it's asking every hour, maybe it's asking every half an hour. So that's what we call periodic polling. And then lastly, this is due to the fact that we're more distributed, talking about hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, all that data is more and more decentralized and scattered across several domains, right? So here are the challenges with that. Batch delivery, if you're using that pattern, you are up to date as soon as the batch delivery finishes, but you automatically get out of sync right after, right? So the longer the batch has been in the past, then the more out of sync you are with your data. Point-to-point is complex, especially with the number of applications that we're seeing these days. If you're trying to connect each and every application to each and every other application, that's a big mess. It's hard to maintain that, it's hard to manage it, and specifically it's hard to manage that with SAP ERP systems, S/4HANA, ECC, who have to talk to almost all other systems, right? Then periodic polling. If you don't know when the data changes, but you want to get to know about it as soon as possible, you can ask about it once an hour, but maybe that's not enough because you might miss an update for 59 minutes or so. So maybe you ask more frequently as kind of like an adjustment to that, but you can't ask every millisecond or something like that because you are causing lots of unnecessary resource utilization. So either you're accepting that you will have delays, or you will cause a lot of CPU consumption, both on the source side and the target side. So that's not an ideal pattern if you want to get real-time updates via request-reply APIs. And then lastly, decentralized. I think that's self-explanatory. If you have that situation and you can't help manage your integration in real time, you end up with a lot of siloed information, right? So the data sits in one system and may not be distributed, synchronized to the other system. So how can we change all of that? How can we help make integration easier and more flexible? So the pattern that we are proposing here to use in this is the publish and subscribe pattern. It's based on event-driven architecture and event brokers, and we'll talk about what that is. But here are some key attributes of that pattern, right? So first of all, we want the system where the data changes to broadcast that information. So turn the pull into a push. So whenever something happens, the source system knows when that happens and they can broadcast it out, similar to a radio station broadcasting it into the world, right? Obviously, there's security controls around that. Not everyone can listen into your broadcast, like with the radio station that wants everyone to listen in, but take the pattern as a publisher pattern. And then secondly, the decoupling aspect of a publish and subscribe architecture is so that similar to a belt in an airport where the handling agent puts the suitcase on the belt on one side, and then he loads up the whole belt, and on the other side, the passengers pick up their suitcases from the belt. He doesn't need to know who's picking up which suitcase. He doesn't need to care if those people are there at the moment, right? He doesn't have to go with a suitcase to each and every person and hand it one by one, how we would do it with a point-to-point scenario. They just put it on the belt, and then it's free for the passengers to take the right suitcase with them. So there's a decoupling aspect here that is quite important with event-driven architecture, and it's a key attribute. And then lastly, the subscribers, they also don't want to get overwhelmed with a lot of broadcasted information. So we do have some advanced features in the advanced event mesh and the brokers that are underneath the event-driven architecture to filter the information. So you can imagine you're subscribing to topics. You can specify some attributes of that topic that you want the information to get from. So you're not getting each and every broadcast that is sent out about trucks. Maybe you just want to have trucks that have arrived and not departing trucks, or each and everything about payments. Maybe you just want to get the information about payments that are received, so you can specify that with the filtering capabilities of this architecture. And it's all done on the brokers, so that saves CPU consumption and processing time on the receiving client. So I just want to quickly introduce the products that we propose in this SAP space. So as part of the BTP platform, there's an integration column, and you all probably have heard about SAP Integration Suite, and specifically, most people think about cloud integration in that context. There's other capabilities in SAP Integration Suite, and there's another product that is part of the product umbrella of Integration Suite, but it's actually a separate product that is called SAP Integration Suite Advanced Event Mesh. And that is really the EDA platform for SAP to third-party integration to build your event-driven architecture. And we're talking here about Advanced Event Mesh. Sorry, that was one too many. So this is the product. We, as was introduced in the beginning, it is a Solus under the covers, who's a technology vendor, but it is a full SAP product that you can get with your BTP EA credits from BTP, and it comes with event management. So there's a solution here that helps you catalog and design your events. Think about that as your contract for the data that you're publishing. And underneath the console and the tooling that we provide to help you adopt event-driven architecture are the brokers, the advanced event mesh brokers that can be deployed in cloud, on-prem, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud. We really can deploy a mesh of brokers that help distribute the data wherever it may need to go. So that is the solution. And I want to quickly do a quick demo on that. So imagine this scenario here. We have a web front end where you can order bikes, and this web front end is sending events via an advanced event mesh to a backend. This could be S/4HANA and ECC. And I'm just going to show you how that looks like. So I'm just going to reload this, make sure I'm connected. Okay, yeah, so here we have an imaginary e-bike vendor, and I'm just going to play a customer. I want to get a Spark electric bike, maybe with an alloy frame, and I like blue, so I'm going to pick a blue bike today. And I can't wait for my bike to get here, so I want to order it right away. I'll put in some details. Obviously, you would put in your delivery address and things like that, but this is just a demo, so I'm just going to put in my details here. And as soon as I hit submit, this is going to be published as an event to the Advanced Event Mesh broker. I'm seeing this here being picked up straight on the e-commerce web front end as well. But in the back end, the S/4HANA system or ECC system is maybe already someone's working on this and is updating the progress of my order, and I'm getting events back to the front end in real time as it happens, and you can see the order status being updated. And this is all push driven, right? So as soon as something happens in the back end, it gets pushed to the front end. So far, so good. So you may be wondering now, why should I use event-driven architecture for this, right? So the benefits of event-driven architectures are really that this is decoupled now. And because it's decoupled, I can easily extend this scenario now. So imagine you want to send an email to the customer to confirm that the bike is now ready and then it's going to be delivered at 6 p.m. tonight, maybe, or maybe 7 p.m. tonight, depending on what time zone you're in. So we can do this thanks to the decoupling of the PubSub architecture. I could just generate an integration suite flow from the event definitions and plug that into this architecture, and it can subscribe to the delivery events that S/4HANA might be publishing, and then I can generate an email from that. Or maybe I want to extend this and do a credit check on the customer before I start producing the bike. So maybe I want to introduce a approval workflow here, so I could build in something based on SAP Business Process Automation. And you can see, because it's all PubSub, it is much easier to change the system, add in components that can get a copy of the data, or that can be easily plugged in to do some additional functionality. So yeah, I just wanted to show that, and that's one of the key benefits of event-driven architecture and event-driven integration. And now if you think about integration with PIPO or similar systems, this is how it's mostly looked like in the past. we still see a lot of point-to-point. So this is becoming a bit of a centralized monolith, and it's tightly coupled integration. You can't easily just plug in another system. You have to do a code change if you want to do that. There's more coupling involved in that. And so the pattern to change that is to change it into event-driven integration, where you split up those larger flows that talk to system A and system B into one flow that talks to system A, publishes to a broker, and then there's another smaller flow that picks it up from the broker and talks to system B, right? So you put the brokers or the mesh of brokers, the network of brokers at the heart, and that is allowing you to then more easily plug in parts into this architecture. Okay, yeah, so you still do your higher level integration in Integration Suite, like you did in PIPO. So whenever you do payload transformation or content enrichment or things like that, that's where that goes into the Integration Suite flow. The data distribution, filtering, all of that is done by the mesh and the brokers. Okay, and I'm going to hand it over to Ankit now, who's going to take you through Rojo's support in getting to this.
Thank you, Christian. Now we have kind of an understanding of why governance is important in this migration journey, or let's call it modernization journey, and also the role of advanced event mesh in the SAP ecosystem. And what we would like to demo is how automation can play a key role in this migration journey. But before we do that, I think it's important to understand what we get out of the box from SAP migration tool. So let me start sharing my screen, and then we can get into the details of SAP migration and assessment tool. So my screen should be visible now. Yep. So, okay. So when we talk about SAP tool, there are mainly two parts of SAP tool. The first part is about the assessment, that is the assessment tool. And the second part is about the migrations, which actually helps you in migrating the artifacts from PO to CI. Okay. So if we focus on the assessment tool, what does assessment tool do? So what it does mainly is it scans through artifacts or integration scenarios within your PO landscape, and it gives you a report. And that report has several aspects in it, like the different types of adapters you're using, different complexity levels it has. It also gives you assessment categories and the modernization recommendation. Okay, what is assessment categories here? It's important to understand that these assessment categories basically tell you for your integration scenarios in your PO system if there's a direct match of a pattern in CI or not. So basically, how easily you can move your PO scenarios to cloud integration or integration suite. As part of this assessment categories, it's mostly categorizes your interfaces between three parts, that is ready to migrate, adjustment required, or evaluation required. When we talk about ready to migrate scenarios, what it means is that these are the scenarios in your PO landscape which can be very easily migrated to CI. So there is a direct match of pattern. On the other side, when we talk about adjustment required and evaluation required, these are the scenarios where you need to put more efforts. You will have to change something in your PO system before you can migrate, or you have to totally redesign it before you can migrate them, right? So basically with this aspect, what we understand is what we can migrate to CI, right? But on the other hand, SAP also tells how should you migrate. Basically modernization recommendation. So for a specific set of scenarios, it tells you for these scenarios, you have to think of using EDA as an integration style. What it means is instead of having a tightly coupled integration, you have to decouple it so that it will allow you to have a more scalable integration pattern. It also suggests you if you have to switch from, let's say, RFC calls to OData APIs or from BAPI to OData APIs, right? And other set of security measures. But now we will focus on this event suggestions which we are getting out of this standard reports. So even though SAP is recommending these improvements, but if we talk about the standard tool, it is not actually helping you in doing those things. So it will just migrate your artifacts from PO to CI, more like a lift and shift approach. But the question is, do we want to do that? Do we not want to use all the capabilities of CI, right? So to understand this, let's look a very conventional migration journey of a customer, how it looks like, right? So if we look at the overall journey or migration journey for any customer, it will have multiple steps. So if we look at the first two steps, it's mostly about what we just discussed. That is the assessment part, where I'm assessing what can be migrated, how it should be migrated. And based on my governance, which we have defined, we will have a migration strategy, migration plan for us, right? And then we will start migrating our artifacts from PO to integration suite, right? And this is where the second part of the SAP tool comes into picture. That is the migrate tool. And this is available within cloud integration, which helps you in moving artifacts from PO to cloud integration. Okay. And when we move these artifacts, there are still many aspects which customer has to take care of. So just give you an example, the exception handling. When we move artifacts from PO to CI, these two systems being totally different framework, in CI, we don't get the exception handling by default when it is moved, right? There is no retry mechanism in CI. So we will talk about it, how we have to think about those things. There is no security artifact which is migrated from PO to CI. All these things has be done manually by customers. And if you think of, say, for example, if I have 1,000 interfaces, and if I start doing them manually, you can imagine how much time will it take for us to do these steps manually for all these 1,000 interfaces, right? And on top of it, if I'm thinking of modernizing my interfaces, it just adds up to my implementation time, right? And this is where what we are proposing is how automation can actually expedite this whole process of enhancing from different aspect. That is how we can add security artifacts. How can I add exception handling to my interfaces, migrated interfaces via automation? How can I enable EDA pattern? That is, how can I decouple my interfaces or migrated interfaces in such a way that I can introduce even broker in between, like advanced event mesh, right? This is the part where we are proposing automation to reduce the manual intervention. And once we have done this, then we go to deploy and then we test our interfaces to match the results, right? So for the demo, what we have done to showcase this automation, we are taking a very simple scenario here. That is one message coming from SAP going to a target system via PO. When we migrate it to CI, how it will look like? It will look like something what you see on the screen. Message coming from SAP S/4HANA, say for example, going via cloud integration and going to the target system like Salesforce, right? Simple scenario here. Now, if we think about the error handling, the retry mechanism, and all these things, this by default will not be there in this solution. Okay, so let's look at the automation, how automation can solve all this problem. Now I will move to my actual automation tool and the assessment and migration tool from SAP. Okay, so this is for those who are looking at the first time, it is SAP Integration Suite. And within Integration Suite, we have multiple integration capabilities. That is, for example, cloud integration, which is where we move artifacts from PO to CI. And we have the migration scenario, assessment scenarios in this tool. So if you look at this assess migration scenario, where we do the assessment, this is the tool, how it looks like. So let's click on it. And what you see is basically two parts. First is data extraction, because you need to extract the data from your PO system, mainly the artifacts details, that how many message mapping you have, how many ICOs you have, basically your integration scenario data, right? Once you extract that data, you start evaluating your scenarios so that you can generate the evaluation report. And if I look, let's open one of the evaluation report here. What you see here is the assessment categories, what we were talking about, and the modernization recommendation, and also the adapters, right? So this is the modernization recommendation we were talking about the integration style, where it is proposing for these interfaces, it's recommended to move to um, event-driven architecture using business events from SAP, right? And this is how, let's see how if we can do it via the standard tool and how our automation can help into achieving that. So if I move to my cloud integration, the other part of the tool, that is the Migrate tool, we will have to go to cloud integration. So that is this part. And within this, we will have to create the packages in advance where we will be moving the artifact. To some extent, this can also be automated, and this depend upon the strategy, how we define our package creation, right? How we segregate them. And package is nothing but grouping of your interfaces. So it also somewhere is governed via the governance you're setting up, that how you will have your naming convention, how the package would look like, and others things, right? So we have already created the package for this demo. So let's open one of the packages. And if I click on edit, what I will see, I will get this migrate button. So this is the second part of the tool, that is a migration tool, which helps you in migrating the artifacts. If I click on this migrate button, what we get is the option to select from which PO system you want to migrate, and it would be mostly your dev environment, but depends upon the strategy what you have chosen. So that's why uh, having a clear migration strategy is key. Let's select the system right now, and then it loads the system for me and gives me the option of all the integration scenarios which is available in my landscape right now. So let's search for a IDOC scenario here. We have this scenario. When I select this, what it does is for me is it is selecting a pattern for me from the available options and giving them as an option. Here I am getting point-to-point async pattern, which I will select and move to the next step. And then it is giving me option of if I want to reuse the mapping or not. So in this case, I don't want to reuse the mapping, but in many cases it will be applicable. And let's name the scenario. So we call it demo EDA to CI webinar. Okay, so we have this scenario. Let me copy this one for now, and it will review it, say, hey, this is how it is being migrated, and I can click on migrate button. Okay. So the interface, or let's say integration scenario, is now migrated from PO to integration suite or in cloud integration. Let's open it and have a look how it looks like. Okay. So as we were mentioning, there are some basic problems. The exception subprocess is empty. So if something happens here, there is no logic to handle the errors. One thing. Second thing, I see a cross mark here. What does it mean? It means my credentials are not configured. So if I go to my channel here, I would see that my credentials are empty here. Okay. So this is another manual task which I have to do besides adding the exception handling logic. And what happens if my message fails here, right? Do I have retry mechanism? No, we don't have a retry mechanism in CI by default, because in PO we have that feature, but in CI we don't, because the framework is a bit different or completely different here, right? So these are the problems which is still there, even though we have a tool available from SAP, and we as customers need to think about these problems, how to solve them. And this is where the automation aspect kicks in, right? So let's look at the automation of how we can um, on top of this migrated interfaces, think about automation. Okay, so what you see on the screen right now is nothing but the list of interfaces from your PO system with the status if it is migrated or imported to your CI system or not. Okay, um, what does that mean is that here, if I click on any one of the scenario, it will show me if it is my imported, and if it is imported, then is there a particular scenario or not? Okay. So let's search for the scenario which we just migrated. Yep. Let me refresh my screen. Yep. Yeah. So if I have to, so basically it also requires where we have to synchronize the details from your CI system to your tool. So let's give a couple of minutes here. Yep. So now if I click on it, yeah. So I have the exact iFlow which I just migrated from my PO to CI scenario here. Um, and now what you see is basically couple of automation options here, depending upon the scenario, right? So you can, if you have defined the naming convention in your governance step, you can actually rename it via automation. You don't have to click on every artifact or your CI and then rename it. You can add exception by just a click of a button if you have defined your exception handling strategy, because you don't need to repeat the same step thousands of times if you have 1,000 interfaces, right? You can configure the credentials as a placeholder in your artifacts, so that you are not opening each interface in CI and then configuring the credentials, right? You can then deploy them. You can add end-to-end monitoring, that's also possible. But today what we will be focusing on is two automation. That is this, we will configure the credentials and we will see how we enable the existing interface to follow the event-driven architecture and solve the problems which we just discussed. So let's click on create and configure credentials. So what it will do, it will go to the iFlow, look for the ICO. From ICO, it will fetch the details of which user was used in the channel, create those in your CI system, configure that in your ICO. So there are a lot of steps happening in the background, but in an automated way, so no manual intervention. So if I just go back to my screen, I see a message that it is already configured. If I refresh my screen here, I should see that error is gone. Okay, so as we see, we don't have the error anymore. And if we look at the channel, yep, it's configured depending upon my system and the user which was configured here. In that case, it was anonymous, so that's why it is how it is. But we can control how we want to have the naming convention there also, right? Now, if you look at the second part of the automation, which we want to showcase, is this enable EDA pattern, okay? So if I click on enable EDA pattern, what it will do is, let's click on it. And if I go back to my PPT here, what it will do is it will split the iFlow in two parts. The first part would be writing it to the advanced event mesh or event broker to a specific topic. And from that topic, we can subscribe as many queue we want to. And the second part of the iFlow would read from that queue, subscribe queue, and do exactly the same thing with all the business logic which was there and send you to a target system. So that way, I have decoupled my system from source. So I have got a persistence layer, so I can retry messages from my queue if it fails. I don't depend on my source system. And we will talk about more advantages, okay? But let's look at the automation in the background, how it worked. So we see a message that EDA is successfully enabled. And we have two iFlows here. So if we look at the publish event and the consume event iFlow. So if I go back to my package and I take a step back here, I should see two iFlows instead of one for the same name, okay? So if I just copy this, this was our actual name. And if I search for this, what we see is two iFlow, which were just created right now with publish event and the consume event. The publish event is basically the one first part, which is publishing my exact same message coming from SAP to a topic in advanced event mesh, because this is the pattern or best practices which we follow. So we always write to a topic subscribe to multiple queues wherever how many targets we have, and we read from the queue. Okay, so let's look at this part of the iFlow here. We are reading the data, we're getting the data from SAP, we are writing it to advanced event mesh. And if I go to the adapter here, it's a particular topic from where to where which we are writing. If you see here, right, this all configured here. So this is the first part where I'm writing to a particular topic. And then in the backend in Solus or advanced event mesh, we have created the subscription to a queue. And the second part of the iFlow, that is consume event, is consuming from the exact same queue, that is here, queue name, and reading the message. And if you look at the logic, it has exact same logic which was there in my migrated interface, and sending it to the target system. So this way, even if my message fails, I don't have to worry. I don't have to ask my sender system to send the message again, because if a persistence layer, I have a queue where I can retry. I have my own exception handling the way I want to, since we have decoupled the system, right? So this is the advantage which we get when we decouple it. I get to retry messages as we want to. I get to handle the scenarios. I can have my own exception handling the way I want. And I'm following the best practices, what was recommended by SAP also, right? So if I go back to my screen, there is one more advantage here. By doing this, if the same data, same information was needed by a particular target system in future, right? In that case, what would happen? What I have to do is just subscribe to a new queue and just create the second Lego block. We can also call it as a micro integration, which just connects from your queue to a particular target system with the business logic which is needed there, right? Without even impacting the source system in any way. So source system is not or should not be aware of who all are consuming my messages. It is just pushing the data once. And from there, we are sending the data to multiple target systems, and also have the flexibility to send the data to future target system who would need that data, right? So this is the advantages which we get if we follow event-driven architecture. And the best thing is we don't have to do this manually. We have automation to support us achieving these or following these best practices without any manual efforts. Okay, so with this, I would like to hand it over to Hugo, my colleague, who will give you details about how you can reach out to us and also about future webinars or events. So Hugo, over to you.
Thanks, Ankit. Thanks for sharing this information, and thanks to John and Christian as well for all the content presented. So indeed, as John said in the beginning, it's like considering moving house and designing your ideal house. So there's an opportunity here for modernization, and we can imagine that throughout the webinar you've got a couple of questions which might relate to specific situations within your company or your situation. So we would like to offer you a free expert session. If you want to deep dive into the SAP PO to CI migration, we can offer you a session. And also, if you feel like you're ready for the next step on advanced event mesh, there is this rapid pilot program. So it's September 30th that it will start. So you can also do a hands-on workshop on advanced event mesh. So if you feel that either one of the two is relevant to you, you could register here right now, or we'll share afterwards the content so you can register. So because moving from PO to CI involves many things, and you could, if you would need more help, you could register for either of these two, and we'll help you out and help you to leverage the new capabilities that you get from the platform. So with these two expert sessions, I would like to move now to the Q&A section of this part. We've received many questions already in the chat. Answered also quite some, but I believe there is some we could elaborate on some of these questions. So over to you, Martin. You moderated the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Hugo. Yes, Hugo mentioned there were quite a few questions coming in the chat, and those were answered as the webinar progressed. But our team would like to share a bit more on some of the topics. Yeah, I see the Christian would like to say a couple of words. So over to you, Christian.
Yes, hi Martin. Hi everyone. So I just wanted to briefly mention, because there were some questions around retry. How do you do retry with advanced event mesh and cloud integration, right? So there are retry capabilities built into the AM adapter with automatic exponential backoff, so you can kind of like slow down things and keep retrying. The brokers themselves will generally keep a message and retry a message. They can do that for unlimited time, or you can configure to retry them for a specific number of times. It depends a bit on the use case that you have, right? So if typically what you want to happen is that if downstream systems are not available, you want to keep retrying until they are available, right? You don't want to start moving your messages off to a dead message queue that then may need some manual intervention or some script to then put them back in. But you can do all of these things with advanced event mesh, right? So you have the option to retry continuously, unlimited time, at certain intervals with the AM adapter to pace it out, or move messages to a side and then do a manual intervention to retry them later. And we're tackling some of these questions as part of the rapid pilot that we're offering. So if you're interested in diving deeper into some of these things, take a look at the registration page for the rapid pilot. The next one is scheduled for the Americas time zone more, but if you want to get informed about further rapid pilots, which we will be doing in other time zones as well, just get in touch with us, and we're happy to add you to the waiting list. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say on that. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks Christian for this additional input. And I know that John would also like to say a bit more on some of the topics that were raised in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. So what I wanted to add to what Christian already said, indeed, just as you know, I concur. However, I always think we don't want to retry just for the sake of retrying, right? Like I said before, this is also an opportunity to modernize. So the question is, I believe, is a good time to rethink about your design. And from that perspective, yeah, the whole event-based way of thinking could also influence some of these aspects, right? Instead of sending large messages, do you want to maybe change the pattern here? So one has to look at it on a case-by-case situation. But actually, if you will consider setting up a governance approach, which, let's say, already takes into consideration how to handle some of these, retry messages. I always ask when we retry, it depends as well, what are we retrying? We should not just retry for the sake of retry, because if you don't have upsert in your backend system, or if your systems are not independent, you also don't want to retry because you don't necessarily know the impact, right? So it's something which one has to maybe discuss a little bit more in detail, depending on your case. There was also a question related maybe to exactly once in order, I believe, what I saw. And obviously here, the EM can also help. However, this is generally, you have to look at it from an end-to-end point of view. It's not just the integration piece, right? Because even if I take care of the integration piece, things can still go wrong on an adjacent system. And there as well, if you have queues on those side of the systems, it can also help you. Again, I'm saying it just in a general because we have to look at it on, discuss it a little bit more in detail depending on your case. But I'm just saying it's a chain. It's not just about the integration in this case. I don't know, Ankit, if you wanted to jump in also on one of the points, maybe. I think there was a question regarding the mapping. I believe that we did not yet address. Oh yes, yeah. Ankit, you want to jump in, or I can jump in here?
Yes, John, I think we can give a bit of an overview of one of the implementation where we had the same. So it's a common problem where we have Java mappings, and there is no, let's say, 100% coverage solution for this, right? For specific types of mappings, Java mappings, we have done automation, we have converted them into Groovy scripts and use them, but it depends upon to which extent you're using your Java mapping, right? So, and this comes into part of your assessment, that you assess the different types of scenarios you have in your Java mapping, because I can be using Java mapping for many different scenarios to get a token, to get X, Y, and there you have to think of, do I have an adapter which already covers this functionality? Because in PO, I had to use Java mapping because of many reasons. The capability was not just there. And here, when I move my Java mappings, actually question myself, do I need this Java mapping there or not? And if I need that, there's a business logic written here. That's also not very good to move at first place. But if we actually need to move it, then we need to think of, okay, yes, automation can help us there. I don't know, John, if you want to add here.
I will add more to it. An example, we've seen a lot of migration that we're helping customers where, let's say, they're integrating to Salesforce, and because indeed of the token, people did all type of crazy things in between, right? But now it's no longer needed because the adapter in cloud integration takes care of it already. So, you know, I believe with this, we've covered the point, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about to be aware of the limitations that you have in the JMS, setup. And anyway, you have limited capacity. I know that if you want to look at it at the scale, using SAP AEM will be definitively the right way to go, because then you cover a lot of scenarios, and the broker already takes care of many more things that, for you, instead of you having to think about all of these things yourself. There's even a size message. The message size is also there are some limitations even with that. So something to consider.
Yeah, that's a good point, John, that I also wanted to comment on. So there was a questions around scaling and message spool or message storage on the brokers, right? So we provided the link to the details for each of these brokers. They can come in different t-shirt sizes. So this is capacity linked. If you're wondering about how does that work with the pricing and things like that, we're not charging on individual messages or anything like that. Whether you're sending 100 messages a second or 10,000 messages a second, it costs you the same. But the brokers have some capacity for queues and connections and message spool, how much data they can store. And they come with a certain amount of storage spool, but that is also extendable. So if you have large buffering use cases, you want to replay data, maybe that's also capability of the broker, then you can extend those brokers each to have up to 6 terabytes of storage. It comes as an extra charge because storage is expensive, right? So we're having to charge for that, but it's possible to extend it up to 6 terabytes.
Cool. Okay, thank you for that. And what I wanted maybe to add is we offer that as an expert session for free. Please reach out, because I know in some cases it's a question of talking about real use cases in this, and there's an expert session as mentioned here. So we look forward to discuss with you in that session. And also if you can join, of course, this training, the 5-day training that we showed. That is also a good opportunity to go a little bit more in detail, because I believe if you really understand the functionality of the broker, you will start understanding also the possibilities with it. You go back to you in case you.
Yes, thanks, John. Thanks and thanks, Christian and Ankit, also for answering the questions. So with that, we come to the end of this webinar. So we've got 2 more things. It's an upcoming webinar together with Solus as well, which is on the 9th of October, where we deep dive into EDA specifically. So that's coming up. And the other one is that we have events also Solus is going to be part of those. So as Rojo, we organize each year events in this time in Barcelona and also in the Netherlands, where we discuss topics around the future of integrations, and that's also seen in the light of what we've discussed today. Like if you move to a new environment, there is lots to be thinking about, but there's also lots of customers that already did this, and we're going to present some cases there and concepts. So with that, come to the end of this webinar. Thanks for attending again, and hopefully you've gathered some information. Please reach out to us if you have more questions or you want to do one of these sessions. You're most welcome. So thanks and have a good day.